So now we might be ready to mix. 8 to 12 hours ago, we mixed our starter, added flour and water to it, and you can kind of see how through this glass bowl there's a bunch of bubbles. The starter rose, and we're going to test using the float test to see if it's ready. Now for the float test, you just grab a little wad of it like this, and you drop it into room temperature water. And you can see that it's floating at the top. So I know that this starter is ready to leaven bread. So I'm going to use that. I've got my scale ready, tared, set to 0, and I've got a glass bowl just because I like to see the activity similar to this. Any bowl will do. So 312 grams of water. This is, 75 to 80 degrees of water. Pretty much just room temp. Don't have to do thermometer or anything like that. And if you're off by 2 or 3 grams for the water, it's not that big of a deal. All right, so I've got my water in there. I'm going to add 208 grams of bread flour. I like the Costco bread flour, but you guys can also use King Arthur, whatever you want. Just make sure that it's a higher protein flour. That's what's going to really ensure you develop good gluten. And then whole wheat. I'm using some freshly milled grains, and if you have the kit, you will also be using these grains. You can also find your own freshly milled grains. Barton Spring Mills is one here in Texas, but pretty much anywhere you live in the country, you can online order freshly milled grains, and I think that makes a huge difference. So I've got water, flour, and for the last thing is the starter. I'm going to use 62 grams of starter, and I like to handle the starter with wet hands. It lets it fall off a little easier. So I'm just going to kind of go and grab it and pinch and drop it on top. That's 77, but that's fine. A little more starter didn't hurt. So from here, I've got my bowl scraper and water, and I've got this all together. So I'm going to mix. So I'm kind of using like a squishing action. I'm going around just kind of really trying to get everything combined. Now this dough is going to be a little stiffer. The stiffer the dough, the easier to work with. So you'll often hear things about like high hydration and things like that. That's all well and good. And the higher the hydration, the easier the grains are to digest. But when just starting out, I recommend sticking with something between 70 and 75% hydration. And you'll see the percents on the recipe that I gave you. All right, so I'm starting to get a shaggy mess here, which is where I want to be. At this point, I'm just going to quickly use this bowl scraper to clean off my hands, a wet bowl scraper. You want to be using water to deal with your dough at this time, not flour. That'll be later when we shape. So I've kind of got most of it off my hands. And now what I'm going to do is take this shaggy mess, and with a wet hand, kind of like a scooper, I'm going to do stretch and folds. So stretch and folds are when you go in, you grab the dough, and you pull it over. You go in, grab the dough, and pull it over. This is how you kind of develop gluten, and we'll do this about 4 more times before we actually shape the dough. At this point, it's not going to be the most rewarding of stretch and folds because we've just mixed it and it needs some time to set and rest. This is also called our autolyse, the time before we add salt and any inclusions. And this will ensure that we develop some good gluten before we add salt, which will break it down further. Last thing I'm going to do is kind of scrape the bowl a bit, make sure I get all that stuff that could form crust off the sides. Now I've kind of got this little mound here. I'm going to cover the bowl, and then I'm going to set a timer for 30 minutes, and we'll come back to it. So 30 minutes have elapsed after the initial mixing, and now we're ready to do another stretch and fold. You'll see that the dough looks more relaxed, it looks a little more homogeneous. This stretch and fold is going to be much more fun. So with a wet hand, I'm going to go in, I'm going to grab, and you can see the gluten is really forming already, and fold it to the other side. I'm kind of doing this like a package on all 4 corners. Pulling and folding over. Pulling and folding over. It's important, don't be shy about how much you pull it. You want to pull just to the point where you're not breaking the gluten, but that you're also encouraging it to break apart and it'll reform itself and get stronger. So I like to flip mine over so I have kind of all those folds on the bottom. And I like to do just a little bit more of tucking. Keep it a nice ball like that. I'm going to cover it, set my timer for 30 more minutes, and I'm going to mark that I've done one stretch and fold. Okay, so this is the second fold now, and rather than just do the same stretch and folds, we're going to add salt. So this is about 10 grams of salt, just kind of a fine grained salt. With a wet hand, I'm going to kind of do the same motion I did earlier. I'm going to squish it into the dough. So this will be breaking up some of the gluten that we've worked a bit to develop, but that's kind of normal. Just making sure you don't get any salt pockets. That's probably the most annoying thing when you're shaping and you find that you have a nice nugget of salt in there. Once you feel like you have it completely in there, again, it's stretch and folds. Might not come together as neatly, but don't worry, the next one will be good. I'll flip it over, get it to a nice little mound. And then 30 more minutes, and we will do a third stretch and fold. So now we are on our third fold, and this is feeling really good. See how far I can stretch it? Stretch and fold. Up and over. I'm just pulling and then tucking, and then I'm turning it over so the seam or all those little fold areas are down. And I'm just kind of forming it back into a neat ball, and it's looking really good. We'll set a 30-minute timer and do the fourth fold in exactly the same way.